Hi there, Physically Debunked here, and it's good to be back. It's been a few weeks since my last video as, excitingly, I've been busy starting my PhD program, and also getting a haircut. Now that things have settled down a bit, I'm keen to keep working on this channel and get new videos out every week. So let's get straight to this video. Today I want to look at an argument which I've seen in various forms for a while. It's a quick, simple argument which seems quite popular among apologists, but ultimately I'll argue that its force comes from misdirection, not logic.
So I get up on stage and there's boos and hisses and all these sorts of things, and I come up the front and I just said to the guy, I said, listen, you spoke so eloquently. I said, come and join me on stage. So he came and joined me at the podium at the front there, and I said, you believe there is no God? He said, there is no God. You cannot be a rational person and believe there is a God. I said, okay, help me out with this. I want to show you something. And I drew a circle on a whiteboard like this. I said, this circle represents knowledge. Everything that could ever be known about any subject fits in there. All the sciences, all the arts. You're an intelligent man. You study at this university. How much do you know of everything that could possibly be known? So he took a pen and he drew that and he went, I reckon I know this much. I said, wow, you're intelligent. He said, yeah, I am. I said, that's brilliant. I said, so that's what you do know? He said, yes. I said, and that's what you don't know? He said, yes. But this does exist, you just haven't discovered it yet. Yes. Therefore, could God not exist in a dimension that you haven't yet discovered? Answer, yes.
Let's lay out this argument a bit more clearly. The way it's presented is quite vague. First, what kinds of things exactly are to be found within this circle? He says that everything that can be known is somewhere in this circle. One way of interpreting this is to say that the circle is a collection of every true statement, or proposition. A point in this circle is a proposition that is true. Now, there are plenty of false propositions, but these are not going to be found within the circle. The circle only contains true propositions. Now, in many ways this construction is already quite problematic philosophically, but let's not get too technical here. Viewing the circle as the set of all true propositions, the argument runs like this. If a proposition is in the circle, then it's true. You don't know every proposition that is in the circle. If there are some propositions in the circle which you don't know, then God exists could be one of them. So, God exists could be in the circle. So, God exists could be true. Based on what was said in the video, I think this is a faithful representation of the logic of the argument. In this form, the conclusions follow logically from the premises, and the premises seem virtually irrefutable. There isn't an obvious fault in this argument as it stands. But notice just how little this argument is actually saying. All it says is that if you don't already know whether God does or doesn't exist, then there's a chance that God exists might be true. If we haven't already found God exists or God doesn't exist within our small region of knowledge, then there's a chance that we'll find God exists in the region of the circle outside our knowledge. But this is essentially trivial. If you don't have a proof of God's non-existence, then of course there's a chance that you may find God in the realm of things that we don't yet know. This isn't anything new, this applies to everything. If you don't have proof that some statement is false, then of course there's a chance that with further investigation, you may find out that that thing is actually true. Based on what was actually said in the video, this is all the argument actually amounts to. So why has this guy bothered to stand up on what seems to be a pretty big stage to make such an obvious point? The reason is that although the words of the argument say virtually nothing, the diagram he's drawn is conveying something completely different. The diagram may seem like it's merely a visual representation of his argument, but really that's not the case. The drawing is making a completely different point. Anyone who is intellectually humble will happily admit that they know a vanishingly small portion of all there is to be known. If you're asked to shade in how much knowledge you think you have, a very small portion of the circle is going to be filled in. Because such a small fraction of the circle ends up shaded in, it seems as if God's existence is more likely than not. If there's more you don't know than you do know, the diagram makes it look like it's more likely that God exists and you don't know it yet than that he doesn't exist at all. This argument that the diagram is making goes so much further than the argument as it was presented with words. But while the original argument was fairly watertight, this new argument relies on a host of shaky assumptions about how knowledge works and how we could know or not whether God exists. So let's take a look at the argument that the diagram is making. What the drawing is saying is this: there's more you don't know than you do know. If there's more you don't know than you do know, then for any proposition you don't know, it's more likely that it's in the circle than not in the circle. You don't know whether God exists, so it's more likely that God exists is in the circle than not, so it's more likely that God exists. This argument is mostly fine, except for the glaringly obvious fact that the second premise is total rubbish. If the second premise were true, it would imply that anything you didn't already know was more likely to be true than not. It would be more likely than not that the flying spaghetti monster actually exists, more likely than not that there's an alien race living under the surface of Mars, more likely than not that there actually is a Time Lord in a blue police box bouncing back and forth in time. There's no way you can reason that God's existence is more likely than not, simply because there's more we don't know than we do know. This guy is selling you a con. His words make it seem like he's giving you a watertight, logical argument, but he uses those words to smuggle in the argument of the diagram, which has a much stronger conclusion based on far weaker premises. It's excellent sleight of hand. Part of what makes the diagram's argument so bad is that it's such a terrible model of how knowledge works. The world isn't just a collection of single, isolated facts. Knowledge is a framework of facts which are linked together by generalised rules. Knowledge of certain facts makes the truth of some propositions more likely, and makes the truth of other propositions less likely. What atheists argue is that the current web of human knowledge makes it seem unlikely or impossible that God actually exists. Just because there's more we don't know than we do know, it doesn't mean that God's existence is automatically more likely than not. To replace the childish picture of knowledge that was used in the video, I'd like to introduce a more sophisticated metaphor which is inspired by the American philosopher Willard Van Orman Quine. Quine believed that knowledge was a man-made sheet of fabric, constrained only at its edges by our experiences. Instead of a sheet of fabric though, I'm going to talk about puzzles. In this analogy, the puzzle represents all of knowledge, much like the circle. At the base of all our knowledge is the knowledge of the world we get from our senses, our sense data. Our sense data are like the edge pieces of the puzzle. We know where those pieces go, and they help us to work out what might be going on in the middle of the puzzle. To understand the world, we come up with theories and frameworks which are like filling in the middle of the puzzle of knowledge, the deepest realms of reality. To judge whether a theory represents the world accurately, we use it to fill in the blanks of the puzzle between the middle and our sense data at the edges. If we use the theory to fill in the puzzle, and we find that it agrees with the sense data puzzle pieces at the edges, then we say that the theory is confirmed by experience, and we adopt it as a useful picture of how the world works. If a theory conflicts with the edge pieces, then it's discarded. Even though our sense data, our knowledge of the world, occupies a tiny portion of all knowledge, that doesn't mean we can't have an idea of what the central core of reality is like. Let's relate this back to the argument for God. If God exists, then God is the central core of reality, the centre of the puzzle. Being such an important region of the puzzle, whether God exists or not has a big impact on what the puzzle of knowledge looks like, and what our experiences are. If God existed, then we'd expect that even if our fraction of knowledge is very tiny, we would still feel the influence of his existence in our small region. Like a scientific theory, assuming God's existence should allow us to fill in the blanks of the puzzle and reproduce what we see at the edges. What atheists argue is that this is not the case. The gods of modern religions seem to accord poorly with what we know about the world, either not reproducing what we expect to see in the world or conflicting with the other scientific theories, other ways of filling in the puzzle that reproduce our experience of the world well. This then is the heart of the issue. Even if we know but a small fraction of all there is to be known about the world, that doesn't mean that God's existence is more likely than not. If God did exist, we'd expect that to have a big influence on the knowledge that we already have. Atheists, including myself, feel, however, that assuming God's existence doesn't fit well with our experience of the world, and may even conflict with our successful scientific theories that do accurately explain why the world behaves the way it does. There will always be so much that we don't know, but that doesn't mean that we can't get a good idea of what reality is, and it doesn't mean that we can't deduce that God's existence looks unlikely based on the small amount that we do know. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe for more atheism, physics, philosophy, and stuff.